Representative Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know it has been a long time. My husband just sent me an adorable photo of our 4-year-old daughter in her Wonder Woman pajamas getting ready for bed to support us. So if anyone needs a pick-me-up when I'm done talking, feel free to come and look at it. It's very cute. So I rise today in support of H 5125, the Reproductive Privacy Act, and thank Chairwoman Williams for her sponsorship. I'm a mother with young children. My son Escher just turned 7, and my daughter Lulu just turned 4. So it's only been 4 years since I was pregnant, and it's only been 3 years since I stopped nursing my daughter. Both of my kids still have special stuffed animals that they take to bed with them. And there's been a lot of talk about babies over the past several weeks. My daughter still sleeps in her crib. She still wears a diaper to bed at night. I basically still have a baby. I could still have another baby. And so this legislation really is a piece of legislation that could actually protect me. And so I wanted to share my perspective. This bill leaves a woman's reproductive decisions to her, working with her doctor. I feel confident that the majority of the members in this chamber have not been to an OBGYN. And so I wanted to give a clearer picture of what that doctor-patient relationship is like, because of some of the things I've been hearing don't ring true. Our OBGYNs support us as we grow into adulthood and as we become pregnant. They deliver our babies and they check in with us in the hospital after we recover, and then we see them, throughout the rest of our lives. The bond established between you and a doctor delivering your baby is a lifelong one. You'll always remember what that person did and how he or she helped you through a stressful, scary process with a very happy ending, holding a newborn baby. When I found out I was pregnant with my son Escher, the very first thing I did was go to a Planned Parenthood. I had just gotten a new job, and so I didn't have a primary care doctor or an OBGYN yet. At that clinic, I found a professional and safe environment for helping women in what can be a trying and stressful time. Every person I encountered there had one objective: to help me make sure I got the care I needed. They made sure I was comfortable in the office. They made sure that I was safe at home. They made sure I was pregnant. And then they made sure I had the information I needed about what happened next and about what to do next. And to my husband's chagrin, gave me a list of expensive baby boutiques where we could buy lots of unnecessary things, as one does when they have their first baby. When I was pregnant with my daughter Luna, I fell down the stairs in our house. And I was really scared, and I called my OBGYN. And she couldn't have been more professional. She treated me as important and got me in that day. Maybe I had nothing to worry about, but she wanted to be sure, and she cared about how I was feeling. And I went, and she made sure, and we both felt better knowing my pregnancy was still healthy, regardless of some bumps and bruises to me. I remember the ultrasound tech from when I found out I was having a girl. And for a little while after that appointment, I thought maybe I would become an ultrasound tech, because these professionals, from nurses to doctors to ultrasound techs, are with us for some of our most stressful moments and for some of the most joyful moments of our lives. I got care from compassionate people doing professional, kind, and benevolent work for women in need, and I feel lucky to have gotten that care. When we talk about Roe versus Wade and the parallel language in this bill, that's what we're talking about. Hearing this role reduced to a set of talking points by so many people who have never gone to the OBGYN isn't fair, and it simply isn't an accurate picture of how women's health actually works. And you've heard, as I have, all of the terrible things that we are purported to want to do to full-term babies. All of us in this body have spent the past few weeks hearing horror stories about what people who support this law want. We've heard horror stories about what we want, but those simply aren't true. I'm a mom, not a monster. I'm about to become an aunt, and I have my niece's sonogram hanging up on my refrigerator. So many of the proponents of this bill are also moms, and you know us, and we've served together, and some of you have served together for many years. We want to pass this bill knowing that children are precious. We treat our own children as precious, and we treat each other's children as precious. Moms know that all of us work together, that we help each other raise our kids. Our children are our pride, and they are our joy, and we give everything to them.
30 seconds.
I ran for office in large measure to set a good example for my children and to help them build the kind of Rhode Island I wanted them to be able to live in. And today, when I vote for this bill, I'll be setting a good example for my children, and I would ask you to do the same. Thank you.
Jamika VC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anyone in this room that I vehemently oppose the legislation before us. But tonight, we all get an opportunity to stand up and tell the world, or at least the state of Rhode Island, where we stand on this issue. Tonight, we are going to discuss abortion and the codification of Roe versus Wade. So to begin with, I have the opportunity to finally, after all these years, present my rationale for my opposition to Roe versus Wade. Defenders of abortion present their argument from the standpoint of the individual, that of the pregnant woman. Our laws, of course, have to take into account the individual person. However, our laws must also reflect what is best for society as a whole, beyond the individual. This is inherent in the social contract. Respectfully placing aside the particulars surrounding an individual woman's pregnancy and the reasons for the conscious decision to abort, society has a moral imperative to protect innocent human life. Herein lies the continuing quandary. Are the developing group of cells within the womb life or non-life? I do not need a definitive answer, biological, religious, metaphysical, or otherwise, to the aforementioned question to stand forever firm in my opposition to abortion. While the debate rages on decade after decade since 1973, and will continue after this evening, as to whether life begins at conception, no one can deny that the potential for human life exists at that very moment. The denial of that potential would be grounded in ignorance of biological fact. Therefore, while abortion may or may not be the legal murder of an actual innocent human life, no one can deny abortion, at the very least, is the snuffing out of a potential innocent human life. Within the framework of a civilized society, this alone makes abortion unconscionable. With regard to the specific legislation before us tonight, as I said the other evening, 2 nights ago in Judiciary, I have a great deal of respect for the bill's sponsor, Chairwoman Williams, who is a dear friend, and the other 4 co-sponsors, all of whom have my respect. It is my firm belief that, contrary to reports about this bill, House 51251 sub A is not a strict codification of Roe versus Wade. For that reason, I'll be voting no on this bill. I urge the members of this House to do likewise. I will briefly point out the inadequacies of this bill that make it the very opposite of a strict codification of Roe versus Wade and its legal progeny. The bill in its current form repeals statutes prohibiting partial birth abortion without replacing it with constitutional language modeled after U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Gonzalez versus Carhart to ban such procedures and maintain a status quo. Potentially prevents, through broad language, state government agencies such as the Rhode Island Department of Health from regulating abortion clinics, and potentially prevents state agencies from adopting and enforcing meaningful rules and regulations for abortion providers. Does not expressly restrict state funding of abortion. Provides no penalties for violation of the prohibition on fetal experimentation. does not provide a definitive definition of, quote, health, unquote, of the individual as it relates to the exemption on the prohibition of post-viability abortions, leaving that wide open to legal interpretation. Repeals the important and necessary language.
30 seconds, Chairman.
Do my best, speak. Repeals the important and necessary language that would classify as manslaughter the willful killing of an unborn quick child, defined in terms of viability, by any injury to the mother of the child, which would be murder if it resulted in the death of the mother. For these reasons and the unwavering firm belief that this is not a strict codification of Roe versus Wade, I respectfully request my colleagues in this chamber to vote against this bill. Thank you.
Chairman McNamara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. I stand in strong support of this legislation. But I would like to preface my remarks by thanking Chairman Craven and members of the Judiciary Committee on both sides of this issue. I am extremely proud to be a member of the Rhode Island House of Representatives, especially with this debate that demonstrated respect and civility on both sides of the aisle. Thank you for that. This is an extremely difficult decision. This vote is a difficult decision, and I realize I have close friends that are on both sides of this vote. I look at it from the perspective boiled down to a woman, her family, and her doctor. A decision that they alone should own. I have also seen divisive bills, and this is a historic bill in the history of this chamber and Rhode Island. I would compare it to two other pieces of history. 1996, when we passed a civil rights bill that prohibited discrimination in housing, credit, and employment based on sexual orientation. And for that, I compared the hate mail that I received on this, and that outpaced reproductive rights 10-1. And we voted it, and people said Rhode Island was going to turn into Sodom and Gomorrah, and the next day it didn't. Marriage equality was another historic moment. This today will be a historic moment, and I realize people, Representative Craven mentioned religion earlier. Yesterday, I thought there were two monks sitting in the back. They ended up being Star Wars characters. I said, wow, they're dedicated. But I thought of that from the perspective of the clergy that were here. And my first election that I got involved in was for another Irish American by the name of John F. Kennedy. And I remember as a child sitting and watching John F. Kennedy in Texas in 1960 addressing Protestant ministers on his religion and the separation of church and state. And he said to them, I quote, "On the issues of birth control, divorce, censorship, gambling, or any other subject, I will make my decision in accordance with what my conscience tells me to be the best national interest, and without regard to outside religious pressures or dictates. And no power or threat of punishment could make me decide otherwise." And with that, I stand by my decision to keep reproductive rights safe for women and families and doctors in Rhode Island. Thank you.
Representative McLaughlin.
You know, Mr. Speaker, members of the House, a lot has been said here tonight. I would ask you basically to vote this bill down. Okay. When I say that, I have the utmost respect for all of you. But when Sam and Doc got up tonight, you know, we must respect life. Okay? We're not the judge, jury, okay, here tonight, all right? We make decisions on who's going to live and who's going to die. That's crazy. God Almighty does. He says, thou shalt not kill. All right? He says, I am the Lord thy God. He tells Jeremiah, I am the Lord my God. I knew you before you were even born. He said, I placed your eyes so that they could see. Your nose, your mouth, your ears, all in separate parts so they would not offend each other. This is what he tells Jeremiah. So when I hear, this is my body, God created you men and you women, okay? And if you truly believe in God, you'll accept that, you know? So I've heard different inferences in reference to the abortion issue, okay? The child won't live. I've heard that scenario. I've been through it. My son was born with his heart reversed, okay? And most of you have heard my story. But if it wasn't for the people at the children's hospital who cared about life, okay, fought day and night to keep my son alive, all right? And thank God they had a procedure. This was back in 1988. 1988, called a switch procedure, where they actually pulled his heart out, switched it around, put it back in, all right? So don't tell me about pain and mental anguish, because I've had it all right? I look and I say, thank God for these people and the advancements in science, okay? And what it means. You know, we must respect life, you know, in all forms. You know, I look and I say, and contrary to, you know, women's rights, okay, there are some who would abuse these rights, who will not accept responsibility for their actions, and are using this as a form of birth control, all right? Look, we have so many contraceptives today that, you know, prevent birth. So, you know, with that said, I think Sammy said it all, Doc said it all tonight. I ask you to vote against this. You know, I mentioned earlier, 2,000 abortions were performed right here last year in the state of Rhode Island. 2,000. One life is important, all right? One life. And for who are we to decide if that individual is deformed or has a problem when he's born, what he looks like, what color he is, okay? Who are we to decide if he can take his first breath or his last breath? We don't have that ability, only God Almighty. So with that said, I ask you to vote this down. Thank you.
Representative Sorodio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand here today to rise in opposition to this bill. As a man of deep faith, stopping any life at any stage is wrong. As a representative of District 64 in East Providence, my constituents have made it very clear that they are against this bill, and I will cast my vote on their behalf. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ucci.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. I rise in opposition to this legislation, and I'd like to thank Chairman McNamara for what he said, because if you look at what we've done today, we have taken on probably the hardest issue that's ever been before us that faces America. And the way we've done it, and the way how civil we've been to each other, and how we've listened to each other is truly remarkable. Going back when this issue came upon us, I haven't read Roe v. Wade since I was in law school. And to go back, it's interesting what they start out by saying. Justice Blackmun says, he recognizes how difficult this is. He says, one's philosophy, one's expectations, one's exposure to the raw edges of human nature, one's religious training, one's attitude toward life and family, and the moral standards one establishes and seek to observe are all likely to influence and color one's thinking and conclusions about abortion. And that's what we've seen here today. Everyone here has listened and participated and we have 74 members here, and I know the one member who isn't here today had a commitment out of town that was long-standing. We're here and we're doing this, and for that I'm grateful. However, I do have to point out a couple of the flaws in this bill, why I cannot accept it. Had this bill been truly just a codification, it would end at page 2. At page 2 it would end, and that's where it would be. And I don't think we would have the debate we would have had. I think it would have gone a lot faster, and I think the outcome may have been different, but it wouldn't have been in my case, but I believe that. But I'd like to say just a couple of things. One, we've removed the partial birth abortion reference to Rhode Island statute, but we've noticed the federal statute. Now again, we're doing this because we think the federal government is going to overturn Roe v. Wade and said, states, it's on you, we're out of the abortion business. Well, what does that do to this statute? That knocks this statute out. So the partial birth abortion ban, if it's federal, gets knocked out. Now let's say it does stay in. Let's say I'm wrong. I'm not a constitutional scholar. Let's say it stays in. The first line, any physician who, in affecting interstate or foreign commerce, knowingly performs a partial birth abortion. If you have a Rhode Island doctor performing an abortion that is not attached to interstate commerce, they're doing it within Rhode Island, then do we have a federal ban? Is that applicable to that doctor? Is it? I don't know. But again, we've taken out the partial birth abortion section out of the bill for some unknown reason. Similar to the arguments about the quick child, we've taken this out for some unknown reason. This bill is not a codification of Roe v. Wade. This bill is not a compromise, because when you compromise, you bring both sides to the table. This is a compilation, not a compromise. This was the pro-abortion folks getting together what they could live with in a bill in order to get it passed. This was not bringing in both sides. And I will say, I've heard from constituents like we all have, no one from the other side has ever spoken to me about this bill. No one's ever come up to me. No one said, hey, Rep, can I talk to you? No one's ever formally done it. I've been here 14 years. Maybe I'm a lost cause and they won't do it. Sorry, Representative Diaz, you're correct. 15 years we've been here. So with that said, it surprises me when we say that it's a compromise. I don't know what was compromised, because I'm on the other side and I certainly didn't compromise. But I respect everyone's decisions here. Come Tuesday, we will come back in here and continue to do the people's business. I respect all of you tremendously, and I appreciate your time and ask you to consider voting no. Thank you.
Representative Blazewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I just want to respond to a few things that Representative Vucci said. First of all, if you look, again, let's look at the language. If you look at the bill on page 2, section C2, makes specific reference to the Federal Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act of 2013 right there. And if that's not enough, this is the strictest codification in the country. It's so strict that if you look at section D, lines 24 on page 2, it states the termination of an individual's pregnancy after fetal viability is expressly prohibited, except when necessary in the medical judgment of the physician to preserve the life or health of that individual. That is directly from Roe versus Wade, And it is, Roe versus Wade allows for you to regulate or prescribe after viability abortions, so long as it contains that magic language which is in there, when necessary in the medical judgment of the physician to preserve the life or health of that individual. We have proscribed abortions after viability. We've gone to the outer limit of restricting them. That's in the bill. And partial birth abortion is a form of post-viability abortion. So that language is directly in there, Mr. Speaker, and I just wanted to point that out for the chamber. Thank you.
Representative Whip Chippendale.
Thank you, Speaker. A lot of the communications that I'm sure we've all had, certainly I don't think I'm the only person who's received a bajillion emails, and a lot of the debate and a lot of the dialogue and just discussion, I think, in general about this issue, there has been a prominence, and I understand in the context of the most Catholic state in the nation, there is always going to be discussion of Catholicism and faith. And it was certainly present in a lot of the dialogue in which I participated with constituents and concerned parties. I am a Catholic, but I just want to say this. Without any hesitation, state that I never really gave much of a mind to abortions. Of course, I knew about it. Who didn't? And as a practicing Catholic, as a young man, I had no opinion. I was ambivalent. I became pro-life unapologetically pro-life when my daughter's head crowned and I witnessed the most miraculous event that any human being could ever be blessed to be a part of. I envy women for the God-given ability to create life. The first thing that popped into my head when my baby was born was, I shouldn't have become an engineer. I should become a doctor that delivers baby. This is the most unbelievable thing I've ever experienced in my life. So while I acknowledge and understand the religious element that has been ever present in the dialogue and debate on this issue, I wish to point out that it's much more than a religious doctrine that is compelling people to strenuously attempt to protect unborn babies. It's not strictly a Catholic thing. I say this because I think it's important in the context of the debate, again, not just today, but over the ages. Because I think there's been a lot of presumptions and unfair assumptions that a certain person is going to vote a certain way or feels a certain way strictly based on faith. Now, certainly as a man of God, it is an element, a very strong element in every decision I make. But my heart, even were it devoid of religion, still would have changed on that miraculous day on February 25th in the 90s. I'm not going to touch on some of the things I was going to touch on, or some of the things I thought I may touch on, because I think this debate has been very robust. I think it's probably, considering the contentious nature of the issue, it's probably one of the most controlled and professional exchanges that we've had on such an important issue to so many people. And I'm happy for that.
30 seconds, Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. But I am emotionally and spiritually devastated by what is about to happen. And I will remain at a loss for reconciliation in my mind of how this happened, probably forever, because I'm a human being. Thank you.
Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, respectfully, I've heard this argument now enough times, I feel like, and nobody's really satisfactorily dispelled it, so I'm going to do it. Representative Ucci mentioned that if Roe versus Wade goes down, who knows what happens to the federal partial birth abortion ban, which we expressly recognize in the bill that is before you today. Well, here's what happens. Roe versus Wade grants the constitutional right to abortion to anybody who needs one under all the rules. The federal partial birth abortion ban, it creates a crime if anyone does a partial birth abortion in interstate commerce. That means if you use a surgical tool that passed over a state line, that's enough. The two, although they touch on abortion, legally have nothing to do with each other. Roe grants a certain right. Partial birth abortion ban is a criminal statute. If Roe goes away, well, then the right to abortion under the United States Constitution goes away. But it does not change Congress's power to create a crime around something that goes through interstate commerce. The two are, it's not even apples and oranges, it's apples and zebras. Thank you.
Representative Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. I'm humbled to be here today. It's my freshman year in the House, and already been exciting. I'm standing up not because I want to prolong this argument. I just know that my constituents deserve to know why I'm voting against this legislation. I'm not voting against this legislation because I want to tell my wife or my daughter how to take care of their bodies. I'm not standing up here because God has told me that what we're talking about is wrong. I'm standing up right now because I've read the legislation, I've read Roe, and I know enough to know that Roe v. Wade is not the law of the land because Roe v. Wade was reinterpreted a different way. Got to Casey. Casey got interpreted a different way, and one day maybe Casey will be reinterpreted. But every point in time, we're not talking about codifying the law, we're talking about codifying an interpretation of the law. And my biggest concern about this legislation, and I expressed it in committee, was the broad nature, from my standpoint, of the language within this law. I've stood up here. I'm not the attorney. I'm not the most elegant speaker here. But I've stood up here and heard multiple attorneys speak this, that, and the other thing, and it all comes down to interpretation. And in my mind, we have the ability, based on Casey, to provide some protections, because I know morally in the third trimester, there isn't a potential life, there's life, and that life is human. And I don't believe this legislation does enough. I don't believe we're doing enough to protect that potential life in the third trimester with this legislation. And all we're doing is opening ourselves up to be in a position in a couple of years where someone reinterprets the work we've done here today to do things we don't want to do with. We never intended to have it happen. So I can't go to bed tonight and vote yes on this legislation, because I can't go to bed tonight saying that I didn't do everything I could to protect the weakest and the most unprotected amongst us. So I will be voting no on this legislation. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative McCannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to offer a couple of words because I've been getting a lot of communication, some very negative, from my constituents and my faith community. I am a Catholic. I'm a man of deep faith. Been married to my wife for 27 years. She is extremely pro-life. I have sisters, I call them sisters, they're sisters-in-law, extremely pro-life. And I'm here supporting this bill. Why? It's very simple for me. It's already been done. It's been done by the United States Supreme Court. It was done over 40 years ago. And if there's going to be a dialogue or any discussion on this issue moving forward, if we're going to come together as a country, respect is the way to go, and we have to start by respecting the law as it exists. Rights already given. All we're doing is recognizing rights already given. And we should respect women to make holy choices, to be great moms. I know I have seen that in my life. And we should also respect science, and we should respect truth. That's exactly what we should do. And we should respect human life. Human life is sacred. But as a country, we are many religions, and we must come together, all of the different religions and all of the different ways of thinking about things, and we must begin the dialogue if ever we're going to become enlightened on this issue. And I should say, pro-life means not dropping bombs in foreign countries every chance we get. It means a lot of things. So I'm supporting this. It's already done. I respect what the Supreme Court has done, and I respect women, and I respect women, it was said in the Journal, to make holy decisions. Thank you all.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you. This situation of an unwanted pregnancy can happen to anyone. But I think it is safe to assume that no woman aspires to have an abortion. In fact, I'm sure that most don't want to make that difficult decision at all. They're likely coming from a position of fear. So fear of the unknown, fear of the circumstance, fear of an invasive abortion procedure itself, and certainly anyone can understand that. But given the current debate, I felt compelled to dig into the facts, and so I'm going to be reading some things because I took some notes. After all, we should deal with the reality of the facts in order to make an informed decision. So during my research, I learned that many mothers fear the potential pain that their unborn baby could feel, and sometimes even ask specific details about it of their abortion provider. After all, these are fair and natural questions, right? To answer these questions, I'd like to first start with a quote given to U.S. Congress during a hearing to ban late-term abortions by Dr. Maureen Kondik, a scientist expert on human embryonic development, who testified that when it comes to pain specifically, scientific evidence is very clear that pain can be experienced by 20 weeks of pregnancy. That's 5 months gestation, or by the second trimester. She went on to state the neural circuitry responsible for the most primitive response to pain, the spinal reflex, is in place by 8 weeks of development, and that this is the earliest point at which the fetus experiences pain in any capacity. This is a mere 2 months pregnancy. Further research revealed the following with respect to the developing fetus at various stages of pregnancy. 5 weeks of gestation, the heart starts to beat. 6 weeks, or 1.5 months of pregnancy, the nose, mouth, ears are starting to take shape, the brain begins to develop. 7 weeks, the hands and feet are starting to emerge from developing arms and legs. 12 weeks, or 3 months pregnancy, fingers and toes open and close. Also, this was confirmed by Dr. Ben Carlson at an interview at the 2019 Conservative Political Action Conference. He said, within a matter of 12 weeks, you can see the little fingers and little toes, the little nose and the face. The heart has started to beat. It's absolutely amazing. I've had the privilege of being able to operate on very little babies that were 25, 26, 27, 8, and 28 weeks gestation, Carlson said. And I can guarantee you they can feel. They can react. So referring to Supreme Court documents regarding Roe v. Wade and other related cases such as Gonzalez v. Carhart, I will directly quote excerpts from the Supreme Court testimony provided. Page 22, it seems unexceptional To conclude, some women come to regret their choice to abort the infant life they once created and sustained. Page 22 and 23, in a decision so fraught with emotional consequence, some doctors may prefer not to disclose precise details of the means that will be used, confining themselves to the required statement of risk the procedure entails. From one standpoint, this ought not to be surprising. Any number of patients facing imminent surgical procedures would prefer not to hear all the details, lest the usual anxiety preceding invasive medical procedures became the more intense. This is likely the case with abortion procedures here in issue. Experts acknowledge that they do not describe to their patients what that entails, basically. It is, however, precisely this lack of information concerning the way in which the fetus will be killed that is of legitimate concern to the state. The state has an interest in ensuring so grave a choice is well informed. It is self-evident that a mother who comes to regret her choice to abort must struggle with grief more anguished, in sorrow more profound. Sorry, just have to turn the page. When she learns, only after the event, what she once did not know, that she allowed a doctor to pierce the skull and vacuum the fast-developing brain of her unborn child, a child assuming the human form. Now, the Supreme Court records also say, and it gives descriptors, the fetus in many cases dies just as a human adult or child would. It bleeds to death as it is torn from limb to limb. The fetus can be alive at the beginning of the dismemberment process and can survive for a time while its limbs are being torn off. Dr. Carhart agreed that when you pull out a piece of the fetus, let's say an arm or a leg, and remove that, at the time just prior to removal of the portion of the fetus is alive.
30 seconds.
Dr. Carhart has observed fetal heartbeat through ultrasound with extensive parts of the fetus removed, and has testified that mere dismemberment of a limb does not always cause death, and that sometimes, or at least at one time, there has been, they were talking about a description of a fetus that went on to be born as a living child with one arm. In Dr. Carhart's words, the abortionist is left with a tray full of pieces. That's all I'm going to say at the moment. Thank you.
Representative Kazar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again in support of Bill 5125 sub A. And I just want to present some information about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and give you a little bit of background and help you understand why they're important here in Rhode Island. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015, provides a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet, now and into the future. At its heart are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call to action by all countries, developed and developing, in a global partnership. The goals recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans. The SDGs build on decades of work, including the work at the Beijing Conference for Women in 1995, by countries and the UN, including the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. So, in the interest of time, I just wanted to highlight one of the goals, goal number 5, but if you want to Google it, they're fascinating and fabulous, and I guide my sort of policy philosophy on them. But included in goal 5 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, which is gender equality, which focuses on women's leadership, working to get women out of poverty, bringing on women in health and women in the economy, amongst other things. One of the goals, 5.6 to be exact, is to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. We are in accordance with the wisdom of around the world and the UN from a health standpoint. If we were to move forward with securing and protecting a woman's right to a safe and legal reproductive health services, and I urge you to support this bill.
Representative Tabone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has
been a tough and sensitive topic for many of us, and I'd say probably for all. I just want to say, many of you know that I have a 21-month-old son who I cannot imagine my life without. And I've thought long and hard, talking to my wife, talking to friends, talking to many of you, and trying to think how to approach the situation. I am certain that when I was a teenager, I would have probably approached this differently. And as an adult, I believe that I have to be a man about my situation. But throughout this time, I've talked to a lot of people, and I've tried to, again, take the time to do this deliberately. And I came across a friend who, a few years ago, taking precautions, and with the use, having an IUD, which is 1% chance of things going wrong, or of being pregnant, she got pregnant, having taken precautions. When she got pregnant, she was taking care of herself, everything was fine, but one day she started feeling sick, and she tried to tough it out. And that night, she ended up in Newport Hospital, and she was in a life and death situation, literally life and death situation, because she was diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy. An ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy in which the fertilized egg implants itself outside of the uterus. That fetus will not survive. But the question was, would she survive? And she was minutes away from dying. My decision today to support this bill is for her. It's for the women who don't have a choice. It's because we need to make sure that these protections are in place. We talk about the Wild Wild West days before Roe v. Wade. I wasn't around, but I can only imagine the sad moments that a lot of these women and families faced when they had to take this decision and just didn't know where to go. Again, I want to make it very clear. I have a son who I love and cannot imagine my life without. But I also believe that we have to protect these rights of women and make sure that in cases like the one that happened to this young lady, who I happen to know very well, that we don't put her life in danger when that fetus does not have a chance. Thank you, and I urge everyone to please support this, because as many of our colleagues have stated, it's already the law. Thank you.
Representative Kazarian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise in strong support of this legislation today because it protects our constitutional rights. Granted, the Constitution may not be a perfect document, but I'm sure we can all agree that it does aim to reflect our values, our dreams of a more just society, one in which citizens have agency over their decisions. I acknowledge and respect that religious leaders have a calling to spread and uphold the doctrines of their religious institutions. I acknowledge and respect that people of faith feel obligated to act in accordance with the teachings of their religions. In fact, our Constitution upholds people's freedom to practice their religion without government interference. But also, our Constitution also upholds people's freedoms to make private choices regardless of religious beliefs, and that is what I'm asking you to consider today. We, as elected officials, also have a calling. Our calling is to legislate in a way that protects our constitutional rights. So, despite whatever personal or religious beliefs we may hold, despite whatever we may feel we would do personally if we were ever put in this situation, we have an obligation in this chamber to acknowledge that a woman's right to choose is a private one. We must also vote in a way that protects that private choice in accordance with our Constitution. With all due respect for our religious beliefs, today we are being called upon to act as elected officials. Today we have a chance to stand up for not only women, but for all of us and our ability to make personal decisions privately. Today I ask that we come together and act as a legislative body and vote in favor of this legislation. Only then will we have ensured the constitutional right of privacy as a basic right for all. Thank you.
Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Speaker. Listening to close to 4.5 hours worth of testimony. It's been very enlightening for everybody, I believe, here. I rise in opposition to this bill, first and foremost because personally it's morally reprehensible to me to take someone's life, whether it be an adult, a child that's growing up, or an unborn child. Second, part of this legislation is too vague for me to be able to really understand 100%. Representative Blazejewski, and it's tough for me to say Blaze, so, said it's for the women's health. Is it for the physical health, the mental health, or the emotional health? I don't know. And I don't know if any of us really truly knows what the term health is going to encompass. Third, most of the emails that I have received that are proponents of this bill are not from my district nor from the two communities that I serve. Most of them are from Barrington, Bristol, East Greenwich, Providence, places that are further south than Woonsocket and Cumberland. Only one came from my district, and we had a very good rapport back and forth, and we finally ended up saying we agree to disagree on this issue. Although the other ones, the opponents of this bill, and I will, if anybody wants to see them all on my phone, I will show them to you. They were all from either my district or from the cities and towns that I represent. So I have to listen to those constituents that say, please oppose this bill. And lastly, if we don't think that this debate of ours today has any ramifications, I've got 2 text messages on my phone today, and I'm just getting another one right now. People are watching us on social media from Pennsylvania and Georgia. So what we do here today is going to matter to certain people in other states of this country. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Speaker.
Representative Ranglin-Vassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not going to stand up and speak today because HD5, my constituents know exactly where I stand on this. I fully support this legislation. But there has been a lot of biblical references and biblical allusions, and I feel compelled to respond in some kind of way as a born-again Christian. I also want to point out that, using the wonderful words of Bob Marley, he says, I'm in no position to throw stones, but I want to say that you can be pro-choice and Christian. And that's all I want to say. Thank you so much.
Representative Ella Wilkinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wanted to take a couple of minutes to speak to my brothers and sisters here in the House, outside of all of the facts and figures that we've shared with one another. When I was coming into the House, as many of you did through the main entry, there was a 3D rendering of a baby in the womb, and I was told the reason that the baby was smiling was because it was taken at the time that the mother was actually touching the baby. And I want to make sure that in the midst of all of the legalese that we're hearing and all of the statistics and the data, that we do recognize that we're not talking about just a group of cells. We are talking about another person. I'm not looking at interfering with the reproductive rights of a woman. What I want to do, however, is to work towards protecting the right to life of the preborn child. Now, I understand that there was a lot of legal conversation going around quick child and the idea of assigning personhood to the fetus, but it is what it is. It's a person. It's a preborn, but it's definitely a person. So what does the bill do? In addition to whether or not you want to debate whether it expands Roe v. Wade, Chairwoman Williams' bill, Let me actually remind you what it doesn't do. It doesn't protect a young woman who's seeking an abortion out of fear or potentially coercion. And I would remind you, 12% of women that seek abortions are between the ages of 15 and 19 years old. Now, if we had allowed that 24-hour notice as an amendment, that might have taken care of that. It doesn't protect a woman's choice to give birth despite having a third party interfere with her. And the American College of Obstetrics reported that 324,000 pregnant women suffer physical abuse each year. So that's not going to be addressed in this. It doesn't protect women and their preborn babies that have Down syndrome from the aftermath of an abortion. And as I had said to you before, in the College of Obstetrics, 2 years after the abortion of the Down syndrome baby, women were still feeling the after effects of that. It also does not truly recognize the value of life. It recognizes what part of the equation wants, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the responsibility that comes from being pregnant for the preborn that's inside of the woman. I would also like to say one last thing with regards to my brother's comment about being pro-life and dropping bombs, because Rep. McKiernan, as a veteran, and many veterans reached out to me to urge me not to support this bill. I will tell you that when the bombs are dropped, sir, they're dropped in preserving freedom in this country, so you could be in here and make a side comment about dropping bombs. Thank you.
Representative McEntee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As all of you probably already guessed, I rise in support of this bill, and I urge you to support it. I want to thank everyone for the lively debate. I think it was great. I think we all got our points across. I just want to say that pro-choice does not mean pro-abortion. Pro-choice in many instances is life. And let me put it to you this way. Most of us here, most of us women, and many of you men who, the 40-something that are voting yes on this bill, you have families, you have relatives, you love kids. We are not what you try to paint us to be. What choice does for women is it gives them the medical options that are available to them when dealing with very difficult reproductive issues. And when I say difficult, that could be a myriad of reasons. And one of the things that choice was decided by the Supreme Court, it came out of the right to privacy. And what I've seen for the 4 years, now on number 5, that I've been up here, is we do this year after year, and the women have to come forward, one after the other, and we invade their privacy, they tell their stories, and we listen. And I always leave judiciary feeling, why do we have to keep doing this to these women? And it's one after the other. And this is the last time that I expect to have to tell my story. I had 4 children, I have 3 now. My second child died after a year of complications from birth defects. If I did not have choice, I could have not had the courage to have my 2 sons. So don't tell me that choice leads to abortion, because it doesn't always. So listen to me and listen to women that have been in these difficult positions. You walk in my shoes and you tell me what you might do. Jim, I understand your son had a terrible heart defect. They couldn't fix my son. They could not fix him. We lived in a hospital for a whole year, and I don't want to tell this anymore. I'm too old, I'm done. But I'm telling it so you all understand that Don't judge us. Don't tell us choice means we're pro-abortion. Most of us are mothers. Most of us have several children. So I urge you, support this bill. Give us the support we need to do the right thing by our own families, by our own situation. You don't know until you stand in someone else's shoes. And when you do that, then maybe you'll see what happens, what it is for a woman to have to go through all this. It's a lot. We've heard so many stories of women who've had abortions, women that they're heartbreaking. They're not like a day at the beach. These women are agonized. It's terrible. It goes against our very grain, but we do what we have to do to live in this world and to make the best for our families, ourselves, and our children. So please, give us the option. Tomorrow is not going to be a different day than today. 46 years we've had this right. We need to continue it. We need to preserve it for the women of the state of Rhode Island. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members of the House.
Representative Nardone.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition of this bill. How much more can I say that's already been said? And I believe a lot of minds have already been made up. As a new rep, I never thought I'd have sleepless nights thinking about a bill. But I have received many phone calls, many emails from my constituents, and none of them have been in favor, not one, have been in favor of this bill. I had gotten emails from different parts of the community, but none in my district. But I not only cast my vote for my constituents, I also cast my vote for my conscience. Mr. McNamara had quoted J.F. Kennedy and how you should vote with your conscience. I'm asking you all to look at this bill and vote with your conscience. I mean, it's been a long night, and I will be casting this vote with my conscience and my constituents in mind. Thank you.
Chairman Craven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to sum up this extraordinary debate. It actually made me think of the line that Michael Douglas said in American President when he was faced with criticism as he sat before the press corps and took questions about the chastity of his girlfriend that was living with him. And he talked about democracy, and I know Representative Amori knows a lot about it, he used to teach it, is a really hard thing to do. A really hard thing to do. Because as we talked about dropping bombs and fighting, people fought for us to have the opportunity, and I'll speak to you, Jim, to listen to me say things that made your blood boil. I know that. I saw it in your eyes. And that's what democracy's about. That's what's fascinating about what we do here. And this question brings it out in us. And it's not because we're making new law tonight. We're not. We're codifying existing law, and we are repealing law that's previously been ruled unconstitutional or determined to be unconstitutional. Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land since 1973. And as a result, this statute that we're contemplating now, this bill, bans late-term abortion, so did Roe. It prohibits any termination after a fetal viability of a pregnancy, 26 weeks, with one exception. When a doctor and a patient get together and that doctor determines that, and I'm going to quote Roe versus Wade, except where it is necessary, an appropriate medical judgment for the preservation of the life or health of the mother. And I've heard a lot of debate, and I understand it tonight. What do those words mean? And if it's life and death, It better damn well be defined. And it's not going to be more defined than this. Why? Because it's a medical decision. We don't legislate medical decisions. They come as a result of a doctor we choose, who we trust, and we go there and we take his advice. That's what we do. That's why doctors are so revered. So if we pass this bill in a few moments, we will have changed 40 years of attempting to get this right, to address late-term abortion. Several of those pieces of legislation are going to be repealed. And we've succeeded, in my opinion, in the opinion of many other appropriately decorated lawyers and legal scholars, we're going to pass something that passes constitutional muster for the first time. With no new rights to abort additional fetuses under additional circumstances, my opinion, it'll be less. So in this debate that we talked about the meaning of, what's necessary, what's the standard of care, we're leaving and putting a lot of trust in the medical science. Well, the law holds a doctor to what we call the standard of care. That doctor has to apply his skills to the standard of care. So the radical things that could possibly happen that we've discussed tonight couldn't happen because the law supervises him in reference to negligence suits, the Department of Health supervises him in references to his license, and the criminal law supervises him in or her. Yeah, I just got educated again. Wouldn't be the first time. Supervises him or her if they commit a criminal act. I think we're covered. But it's also about opening up the old wound. Does a woman really have a right to choose to terminate a pregnancy? And under what circumstances?
30 seconds, Chairman.
Roe versus Wade has decided all those questions. And it's not semantics. It's medical science. It's a hard, emotional decision for me, but when I had a phone call this afternoon from Reverend Donnie Anderson, who's a constituent of mine, he gave me some pep talk, and then he said, good luck, and I'll be praying for you. And I sat back in my chair, and I said, what a hard decision I'm going to have to make, what a difficult decision and discussion I'm going to have to subject myself to tonight. And I stopped myself right there, and I said, Bob, it's not about you. It's about women and their right to choose. And that's what we're doing here. We're giving the woman's body back to her to let her make her own decisions about her reproductive health care. I urge you to vote for this bill. Thank you.
Representative Quattrochi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will keep this very brief. I am actually glad, although I'm very surprised that the United Nations was mentioned tonight, but I'm glad because it might be the most truthful thing I've heard all night. And it was no accident it was mentioned, because that's where this all stems from. An agenda coming from other countries, drilled into our society, whether it be through media or academia, to weaken our nation.
What is your point of order, Chairman?
Mr. Speaker, I believe that the representative is impugning, violating 10B of our rules.
You're overruled, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay.
You're overruled, Chairman. Proceed, Representative. We're not censoring anybody's thoughts in this room.
Thank you.
Proceed, Representative.
And I'll finish with that part of it. If we discovered one single amoeba on Mars, we would be proclaiming that there's life on Mars. This bill is supposed to be better
than what we had. From what I can tell, there was no problem getting an abortion previously in Rhode Island. In fact, I personally know of 2 people who've had multiple abortions, essentially using abortion as birth control. So as I said, this new bill is supposed to be new and better than what we had. Eliminates the ability to charge someone with a double murder of mother and child. Eliminates the possibility of the dying declarations of a woman to be admissible in a homicide case. Eliminates the language of willful killing of the unborn quick child. Eliminates the declared purpose of the chapter, which was to promote the state's interest in furthering the integrity of the institutions of marriage and family. Eliminate spousal notice requirements, of course. And eliminate civil remedies which provides money damages for psychological and physical injury, just to name a few. That's all I have to say, Speaker. I urge everyone to vote against this atrocity. Thank you.
Chairwoman Williams, last light.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of this chamber.
Was the last light. Proceed. Proceed, Chairwoman Sari.
I guess I'm going to need my passport to get back to the West End. But I just have to say, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing both sides to share their view on this matter. It is indeed a very difficult issue and vote. But we did it together. We listened, we heard each other's personal, each other's constituents' concerns. We heard them and we told them here on the floor together. We need to do more of that together. I thank everyone. I appreciate everyone's point of view. Each one of us have something to offer. This evening have showed and proven how different each one of us are. But we all have a lot to give. I proudly stand tonight on the shoulder of former Representative Barbara Burlingame. I can see her vividly right now in this chamber with her pearly teeth, her pearls around her neck, and her wrists. She was no joke. She was a force to be reckoned with. When it came to issues that pertain to women, then the women all came together in spite of their differences. Because you know how sometimes we can get a little and not get along. But that didn't play a role when it was time to take care of business. They were all shrewd, got together, looked at the issue, and dealt with it and got it done. I thank her, I miss her. Those are some shoulders that I am going to always remember that kept me from falling. Linda Kushner, another great hero. Sandra Barone, another one. And Edith Agello. We rocked steady, baby. Yes, we did. You talk about we shall not be moved. We can't. We get many people to listen as women, but far too often we are not heard. But these past couple of weeks, believe you me, I heard, I listened, I heard, I felt, I know. There's no question. And I thank everybody on the opposite side, on my side, on our side, in between the side, all sides. I thank you for having the courage and the commitment to come in here and stand for what you believe in and represent your constituency. As a woman, I stand here for all the women who feel and believe like I feel and believe. All of the young girls who are looking up to women and older girls for the same guidance that we as women will have to offer them.
30 seconds, Chairwoman.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank each one of you, no matter what side you're on. I thank for the opportunity of being here today and bringing this. 30 years is a long time. I'm only 15, but at any rate, 30 years is a long time, and we're here today, and I thank you with all my heart.
Representative Roberts.
Thank you. I just want to present a little more information of my research, so I'll try to be brief, but I have something from Dr. Levatino, who did 1,200 abortions, so I'm sure that he was on the side of many of you in here, very strongly felt that it was okay. And he turned around and asked Congress to ban them, and he gave some testimony, and a lot of the details I just don't want to get into anymore, other than to just say that many times a little face, what he said was many times a little face will come back out and stare at you. He goes, if you refuse to believe that this procedure inflicts severe pain, if you refuse to believe that this procedure inflicts severe pain on that unborn child, please think again. There was also, this is another fact of interest, I guess it's been well documented. It says the plaintiff in the case, Norma McCorvey, became pro-life afterwards and said, I'm Norma McCorvey, the former Jane Roe of the Roe v. Wade decision that brought legal child killing to America. I was persuaded by feminist attorneys to lie, to say that I was raped and needed an abortion. It was all a lie. Since then, over 50 million babies have been murdered. I will take this burden to my grave. Please don't follow in my mistakes. As such, a lot of people have turned around and regretted these decisions. So I just ask you to please consider that, and I implore you to vote against this bill. Thank you.
Representative Ranglin Vassell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to be clear on something, a reference that I made in regards to Bob Marley. I did not suggest that Bob Marley is saying anything about abortion. I simply said that I quoted a song that Bob Marley sings, if you live, and I'll do it in the vernacular, if you live in a glass house, don't throw stones. If you live in glass houses, do not throw stones. So I'm not going to talk about what other people say. I am just going to be saying that I will be voting yes on this bill. Thank you.
Okay, there are no other lights. Clerk, right? Let me ring the bell. I know some folks might be in the lounge. Clerk, unlock the machine. All those in favor, please vote green. Those opposed, red. Clerk, lock the machine. There are 44 in favor, 30 opposed. The act prevails.